The topic which I've been asked to speak about this morning concerns primarily the United Kingdom and two important, even major facets of the contemporary incitement against Israel and the Jewish people, which are visible, increasingly visible, I would say, in British society. There is, of course, a history to that, but in 20 minutes, I will only refer to that history in passing. One preliminary remark: although I will focus primarily on the left wing of the political spectrum, and to some extent on Muslims in British society and the way the left and Muslims, particularly radical Muslims, interact in the area of anti-Israel incitement, of course there are many other very active forces at work. And for the sake of brevity, I will only mention those here and there. We could therefore speak, particularly since the year 2000, the last decade or so, of an increasing convergence between those who belong to the left, especially the radical left, but not only the radical left, and those who promote Islamism in British society. And one of the key areas of cementing or rapprochement is the question of Israel-Palestine. There are also other factors, such as anti-Westernism, anti-globalization. Sometimes anti-Americanism is the dominant strand in the anti-Westernism, but again, it's not only anti-American. The unwritten alliance, a very loose alliance between these forces which have many things that divide them as well as certain points in common, is clearly related to developments and events in our own region. Just to remind ourselves briefly, the Second Intifada, in other words, since 2000, 2001, the Iraq War, Operation Defensive Shield, the Second Lebanon War, the Gaza Flotilla, these have been obvious triggers, not necessarily deep causes, but certainly catalysts. And the demonization of Israel has increasingly appeared as a motif that is promoted actively by Islamist and left-wing forces, but has a very large hinterland behind it of support, including from the moderate left. This is one of the most alarming features of more recent developments, and the liberal center, liberal Democrats, enlightened liberal opinion in Great Britain, as indeed in much of Western Europe. Palestine has been seen now for a long time, for decades, but since the year 2000, I would say, as a central paradigm of oppression in this world. And if we try and draw a conceptual map of the very Manichaean approach that is adopted by the anti-Zionist and anti-Israel forces in British society, it would look roughly like this. The Israelis are not only the bad guys, we are actually, for many, the embodiment of absolute wickedness, and even evil. And on the other side, the Palestinians represent absolute innocence, quite irrespective or regardless of the facts of the case. Broadly speaking, Israel is perceived along this spectrum, both of the left and of the Islamists, as being European, white, Western, colonialists, foreign to the region, invaders. The whole story of the Zionist project is that of a foreign invasion and the stealing of an indigenous people's land. That is the bottom line of the entire Palestinian narrative that has been bought hook, line, and sinker. And by the same token, on the other side of that Manichaean vision, we have the Palestinians as a paradigm of a occupied, exploited, poor, landless, non-white, third world people. That is the basic division. On top of that, we have the really corrosive image of Israel as an apartheid state. This has become a prime, a pillar in the unwritten axis, and for many other people. It's quite pervasive in the entire discourse about Israel-Palestine that is conducted in Britain. And again, I say many of these things are duplicated throughout Western Europe, in Norway, in Sweden, in Holland, in Spain, and so on, France, Germany. But in England, this has achieved considerable resonance and respectability, so that the center-left opinion-forming newspapers, for instance, such as The Guardian, which is particularly, I would say, militant in this respect, and it's online, and its comment is free, is full, I would say, quite often even of anti-Semitic aspersions. The Independent, obviously many of the left-wing organs of opinion, ranging from the more moderate, the New Statesman, through to the older Marxist-style publications like the New Left Review, but also the very prestigious London Review of Books, which is absolutely an elite opinion-forming journal, published in London, of course, and which a number of studies have shown has never, in the last 20 years, ever published an article that could even be considered as balanced, let alone pro-Israel, but hundreds of very hostile pieces, over 50% of which are written by Jews, and in some cases by Israelis, because that provides in almost the perfect alibi against inevitable charges of bias, discrimination, and even anti-Semitism. The BBC, of course, has its own unique contribution, unrivaled, I would say, in the world of highly influential television commentary, and the drip, drip, drip of the disinformation that has come out of the BBC and its worldwide outreach should not surprise anyone in this room who follows it. Although the impact of the Islamists on British society is difficult to measure, clearly they form only a small minority even within the Muslim community that today is probably close to 3 million, Again, these estimates vary. I would say perhaps 2.9 million currently. If we think of the Jewish population of the United Kingdom as 290,000, that would make a ratio of exactly 10 Muslims to 1 Jew in the UK today. It's a similar ratio in France, except that there are 6 million Muslims and about 600,000 Jews. The relations between Muslims and Jews have their ups and downs, but there is no doubt that the Anglo-Jewish community, whether it openly admits or concedes the scale of the potential danger to it, is worried, is anxious, because, particularly in the last decade, the cumulative impact of the Muslim influence on the debate, which is mixed, but the cumulative impact has been to increase a sense that is already there that somehow Israel is responsible for all the difficulties in the Middle East and everything that flows from that. We have a paradox because undoubtedly feelings within the British public towards Muslims are growing more and more antagonistic. And it's not that surprising given that we've lived through a decade of high-profile terrorism, growing awareness of jihad and jihadism, the mass migration of Muslims, not just to the UK, but of course all over Western Europe, a profound demographic change which induces all kinds of anxieties. Feelings towards Muslims are probably much more hostile in the UK than towards Jews as such. But the hostility to Israel is now so intense and flows over into so many corners of British society that to contain it in the way that perhaps many British Jews might hope would be possible is really not realistic. And this is felt much more on campuses. There is no doubt, and this has been true for well over a decade. In fact, it was true in my day. When I was a student in the UK in the mid-1970s, we had to fight against the first, as it were, seeds of the delegitimization campaign. As far back as 1976, immediately after the UN resolution on Zionism as racism, as a PhD student, I wrote a pamphlet called The Myth of Zionist Racism and had to debate all across the UK with Palestinians, with Trotskyists, quite a number of them Jewish, and many others who were already pursuing the anti-Zionist cause. Today it's much more organized. In those days it was not mainstream. The biggest change that occurred in the last 30, 35 years is the mainstreaming of what then was considered far left and beyond the pale, or belonging to some kind of eccentric and unacceptable point of view. But even then, the challenge was there, and it led to the banning of Jewish societies for a while. In fact, the writing was on the wall, and certainly I myself and a number of other people wrote about it even then, but little attention was paid to it. Certainly not in Israel, where the awareness of the dangers of delegitimization took decades to finally penetrate into the establishment. But this is equally true of the Anglo-Jewish establishment, so that one can certainly spread the criticism very broadly. The issue of the Holocaust and what I would call the inversion of the Holocaust plays an important role in the cementing of this unspoken alliance, convergence of interests between the left and the Islamists, which is, of course, a way of saying it is the ultimate evil. And this is an inversion of the Holocaust, the use of the Holocaust as a boomerang, as a weapon, against the Jewish state. From the Islamic side, this coincides sometimes, indeed quite often, with denial of the Holocaust, even open, outright denial. Exactly as it exists in the Middle East, so it spills over into the Muslim diaspora. And there is also conspiracy theories, openly anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. On the left, these are presented in a more muted way. The references are usually to the lobby, the insidious, hidden power of Jewish money. This is often used in British political debate. Even a prominent Jew who was Shadow Foreign Secretary Gerald Kaufman, only last year referred to the Conservative Party as being funded by Jewish millionaires. And this presumably explains some of its policy towards Israel. These kind of propositions are heard more frequently. Let me also point to the fact that during the last decade, for instance, in the mass demonstrations against the war in Iraq, there was considerable cooperation between left-wing organizations, such as the Socialist Workers' Party, who have no influence in parliament, but have a considerable extra-parliamentary impact on the left, and the Muslim Council of Britain. And within the Muslim community, there are strong influences, both from the Muslim Brotherhood and also, even more, particularly in the mosques, from Saudi-funded incitement, and this is real incitement, much of it anti-Semitic, obviously anti-Western in general, which is aimed at separating the Muslim community from this sinful, corrupt Western society, much of it Jew-ridden and Jew-controlled. And studies have been made of this, very detailed studies of the Deobandi influence, which is a highly puritanical form of Islam, most of this funded by Saudi Arabia. It's absolutely chilling to read what is preached in many of the mosques in Great Britain, and the cumulative influence of this is not to be underestimated. I have mentioned the campus, but I have to mention the boycott, because Britain is the world center of the academic boycott and of the trade unions boycott. The trade unions are a powerful force in British society. We're talking about millions of members who subscribe to an economic boycott of Israel. For the moment, more confined to produce coming from the West Bank, but it goes beyond that. The TUC, the Trades Union Congress, the major British unions, the General Transport and Workers' Union, the Unison or Unite, we're talking about millions of workers, also the National Union of Journalists, etc. The academic boycott, as I'm sure most of you know, has been persistently, repeatedly passed in resolutions at the representative union of British academics. This is a small left-wing clique which succeeds time after time in pushing through motions that denounce Israel as an apartheid state, call for cutting all links with Israeli universities, scientific and technical and other cooperation. If it were not for a legal opinion which pronounced this as discriminatory, the effects would already be seen much more directly in practical terms. Other countries have tried to follow this pattern, but only in Britain has it achieved this level of success. I'm told I have 1 minute. What can I say in 60 seconds? Perhaps a good illustration of the way in which the sometimes open and brazen, but often more subtle forms of incitement against Israel work in Britain today, I will give an example from a highly respectable institution, and certainly this is not a representative of the left, but I think it's a sign of where things are today. There are many other signs, because everything I've said, unfortunately, is only the tip of the iceberg. But let me give you an example from only last year, when there was a court case, a criminal court trial, that took place in Britain after the ransacking of a factory near Brighton, which was producing, or was claimed to be producing, armaments that would be sent to Israel, and damage was done of something like £200,000 worth. And the perpetrators were brought to trial, and the judge in this case, George Bathurst Norman, issued an 87-page summary and instructed the jury. I think almost unprecedented terms, this was pure incitement from a respectable, supposedly respectable judge within the independent British judiciary. A pure document of incitement against Israel, in which he basically justified the perpetrators, who of course were acquitted as a result of these instructions. He spoke about Gaza as a hellhole on earth, and of course blamed Israel 100% for this hell on earth, and repeated all the well-known tropes, many of them anti-Semitic, it has to be said, including the libel that the IDF, the Israeli armed forces, are in fact nothing more than child killers. This is what a judge, a member of the establishment, says. So there's a curious consensus emerging on the question of Israel, much more than solidarity with Palestine, highly organized though it is with the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. It's not only the left are a driving force, a spear force in mobilization and in promotion. But this extends to all corners, and it's amplified. It's constantly repeated. And the result of this, I think, is increasingly seen on the campuses, and inevitably it will bring to bear its poisoned fruits in the years to come, unless a sea change occurs. Thank you.